My name is Evelyn Reed, I'm 68 years old, and my own sons tried to kick me out of my late husband's will reading. Before I tell you about the moment their smirks vanished forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in Mr. Davies' office was thick with the smell of old books and lemon polish, but all I could feel was the suffocating tension. It clung to the heavy mahogany desk and the leather-bound law books that lined the walls, a silent witness to the ugly little drama unfolding. Across from me sat my two sons, Mark and David, and their wives Karen and Tiffany. My family. The four people who were supposed to be my comfort in the darkest time of my life. Instead they looked like vultures. Mark, my eldest, cleared his throat. He wore a suit that was a little too expensive, a little too tight across the shoulders, as if he was trying to physically contain his own importance. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the polished wood. "Mom," he began, his voice dripping with a kind of practiced, condescending sympathy that was far more insulting than outright anger. "I'm sorry, but this meeting is really just for the heirs named in the will. We don't want to drag this out for you." His wife, Karen, nodded, her perfectly manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm on her designer purse. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. Beside them, David, my younger son, wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a spot on the carpet, his wife Tiffany's hand resting possessively on his arm. They thought I was a fragile old woman, a grieving widow lost in her sorrow, easily pushed aside. For a week, ever since the funeral, they had treated me like a piece of antique furniture, something to be dusted off and managed but not truly seen. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what my husband, their father, had done in his final months to protect me. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry or protest. The time for tears was over. I simply reached into my black leather purse, the one Arthur had given me for our 40th anniversary, and pulled out a single heavy cream-colored envelope. I slid it across the vast, gleaming desk. It made a soft, definitive sound as it stopped in the center of the table. A declaration. Mark's eyes narrowed. Karen stopped drumming her nails. They all stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet but clear. It cut through the suffocating silence. "You're right, Mark. This meeting is only for the heirs. Perhaps Mr. Davies should start with that." But to understand the look of pure terror that washed over my children's faces when that envelope was opened, you need to understand the betrayal that happened long before we ever set foot in that office. It all started 2 years ago, on a crisp autumn afternoon in our small suburban home just outside of Chicago. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, but inside our house, a cold winter was setting in. That was the day the doctors gave Arthur his diagnosis. They used a lot of long clinical words, but they all meant the same thing. Our time together was running out. For 45 years, Arthur had been my rock. We had built a life from nothing. I remembered when we were first married, living in a tiny apartment dreaming of the future. I had just won a scholarship to the Art Institute of Chicago, a dream I'd held since I was a little girl sketching on scraps of paper. But then Mark came along, and a year later, David. My art supplies were packed away and replaced with diapers and formula. My dreams were put on a shelf to make room for theirs. I worked nights as a waitress to support us while Arthur finished his degree. I poured every ounce of my energy, every dollar I earned, into giving those boys the best possible start in life: good schools, music lessons, a college fund. I never once regretted it. A mother's love is a sacrifice, and I gave it freely. Arthur always told me, "One day, Evelyn, when the boys are settled, you'll go back to your painting. We'll turn the spare room into your studio." It was a promise that kept my old dream alive, a flickering candle in the back of my mind. But as the boys grew up and started their own families, one day never seemed to arrive. There was always something. Mark needed a down payment for his first house. David's business was struggling and needed a loan. Their wives, Karen and Tiffany, always had a new project, a new need, a new subtle demand on our time and our savings. And I gave because that's what a mother does. When Arthur got sick, the illness consumed our lives. The endless doctor's appointments, the medications, the nights spent worrying. In the beginning, the boys and their wives were there. They brought casseroles and offered hollow words of support. But soon, their visits became less about Arthur's health and more about other things. Conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room. I'd find them huddled in the kitchen, whispering about finances, about the house, about the future. Their concern wasn't for their dying father or their grieving mother. It was for their inheritance. The first real crack in the facade happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon, about a year into Arthur's illness. He was upstairs resting. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when Mark and Karen came in. They didn't bother with small talk. Karen placed a stack of papers on the kitchen table, her smile as bright and artificial as a plastic flower. "Evelyn," she cooed. "We were thinking, with everything you have on your plate, it must be overwhelming. All these bills, the insurance paperwork. It's a lot for one person." I dried my hands, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I knew this tone. It was the tone she used right before she asked for something. Mark slid the papers towards me. "It's just a power of attorney, Mom," he said, trying to sound casual. "It would just allow us to help you manage things. Pay the bills, talk to the doctors. Just to take some of the burden off you." I looked down at the legal document. The words blurred together. But I understood their meaning perfectly. They wanted control. While my husband was still breathing in the room upstairs, they were already trying to take control. My hand trembled as I reached for the papers. My hand trembled as I reached for the papers on my kitchen table. The words "power of attorney" seemed to leap off the page, stark and predatory. It felt like a legal trap laid out on my cheerful floral tablecloth. A stark black and white threat against the warm colors of my home. I looked from the papers to Karen's perfectly composed face, her smile never wavering, then to my son Mark, who was trying so hard to look helpful and failing miserably. He couldn't hide the flicker of avarice in his eyes, a quick, hungry glance that betrayed all his carefully chosen words. "Just to take the burden off you," he repeated, his voice a little too smooth, a little too rehearsed. It was the voice he used for sales pitches, not the one he used with his mother. A hot flash of pure, unadulterated anger crawled up my neck. A burden? Taking care of my dying husband, the man I had loved since I was 19 years old, was the greatest honor of my life. It was a painful, sacred duty that I would not have traded for anything in the world. Managing our finances, the ones we had painstakingly built over 45 years of shared dreams and hard work, was my right and my responsibility. They weren't talking about a burden, they were talking about my life, my future, my independence. And they wanted to seize it, to wrest it from my hands while my husband was still breathing upstairs. I forced a weak smile, a pathetic attempt to maintain the peace that I was suddenly realizing had been a sham for years. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said, my voice sounding distant and thin to my own ears. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating above the scene, watching a play about a foolish old woman and her greedy children. "But your father and I have always managed our affairs together. I think I can handle it for now." Karen's smile tightened at the edges, the skin around her eyes crinkling just enough to show her irritation. "Of course, Evelyn. It was just a suggestion." The way she said my name, Evelyn, instead of the mom she usually used in a syrupy, affected tone, felt like a small, deliberate jab. It was a reclassification. I was no longer family. I was a business problem, an obstacle to be managed. "We just worry," Mark added, laying the final, suffocating layer of guilt. He tried to place his hand over mine, but I pulled it away instinctively. "You're not getting any younger. And with Dad's condition, things can get complicated. We wouldn't want you to make a mistake, or for someone to take advantage of you." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The only people trying to take advantage of me were standing right there in my kitchen, smelling of expensive cologne and false concern. "I'll be fine," I said, my voice a little firmer this time. I slid the papers back across the table towards them. "Thank you for your concern." It was a dismissal, and they knew it. After they left, taking their toxic ambition with them, the house felt cold and empty. Their cloying perfume and false sympathy lingered in the air like a bad smell. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the spot where the legal papers had been feeling like a scorch mark. That was the moment I finally admitted to myself what my heart had been trying to deny for months, maybe even years. My sons saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle. An aging gatekeeper to the inheritance they felt they were owed. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a line item in their future budget, a problem that would eventually solve itself. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the floral pattern on the tablecloth, until the afternoon sun faded and the kitchen was filled with shadows. The grief for my husband, which was a constant companion, was now joined by a new, sharper grief, the grief for the sons I thought I had raised. I didn't know that Arthur, lying in his bed upstairs, had heard every word. The door to our bedroom had been ajar, and their voices, sharp with intention and greed, had carried up the stairs. He had heard the smooth pitch, the feigned concern, the subtle pressure. He had heard my trembling refusal. That night, as I sat by his bedside, holding his frail hand, he looked at me, his eyes clearer and sharper than they had been in weeks. The fog of his illness seemed to have lifted, replaced by a fierce protective fire. His grip on my hand tightened, his knuckles bony but strong. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice raspy but firm, each word an effort. I heard them. I heard everything. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to fall, hot and silent, onto our joined hands. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "My own sons," he said, a deep rattling sadness in his chest that seemed to shake his whole body. "Talking about their mother like she's a chore to be managed. Talking about our money while I'm still lying in this bed." He took a ragged breath, a sound that tore through me. "They aren't the boys we raised, Eve. They've grown hard. Ambition, and their wives, they've poisoned whatever good we put into them." "Oh, Arthur," I sobbed, laying my head on his arm, the thin fabric of his pajamas damp with my tears. "What are we going to do? What have we done wrong?" "We did nothing wrong," he said, his voice firm, cutting through my despair. "We loved them. That's all a parent can do. What they choose to become is on them." He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought he had drifted off to sleep. But then he squeezed my hand again, this time with a surprising urgent strength. "We're going to protect you," he said, his voice filled with a sudden fierce clarity. "They think you're weak. They think I'm too sick to see what they're doing. We're going to show them they're wrong." He told me his plan then, in the quiet darkness of the room, with only the hum of the oxygen machine as a witness. It was a plan so simple yet so cunning it took my breath away. He was going to create two wills. The first one, a decoy, would be a masterpiece of misdirection. It would give them exactly what they so arrogantly expected. He would draft it, sign it, and leave it in his desk drawer, a piece of irresistible bait for their greed. The second one, the real one, would be his final act of love, his last stand, a legal fortress built to protect me from my own children. "But Arthur," I whispered, horrified and fascinated at the same time, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of his shocking proposal. "That's deceptive. It's not right." He turned his head on the pillow to look at me, his eyes burning with a righteous anger. "Is it more deceptive than trying to trick your own mother into signing away her rights, Evelyn? Is it more dishonest than plotting to take control of a dying man's assets? They started this game, not us. They fired the first shot. I'm just going to finish it." That night my husband made a secret phone call. I heard him from the hallway, his voice low but determined, speaking to Mr. Davies. He was setting the pieces on the board for a game our sons didn't even know they were playing. I didn't know it then, but in that moment he was forging the shield that I would desperately need. The day of Arthur's funeral was a surreal, disjointed nightmare. It was a beautiful day in early May, the sky a crisp, indifferent blue, the trees in our neighborhood bursting with defiant green life. It all felt like a cruel joke. How could the world be so beautiful when mine had just ended? The house was filled with the scent of lilies, a cloying funereal smell that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. People came and went in waves, neighbors, old colleagues of Arthur's, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. They brought casseroles and disposable foil pans and offered hushed, practiced condolences. "He's in a better place," they'd say. "He's at peace now." I would just nod, my throat too tight to form words. The only place I wanted him to be was right here, with me. Every handshake, every sympathetic pat on my shoulder felt like a violation of my grief. I felt like an actress in a terrible play, going through the motions, my real self hidden away somewhere deep inside, shattered and screaming. All I wanted, with a desperation that was a physical ache in my chest, was one final quiet moment with my husband. One last chance to touch his hand, to whisper goodbye to the man who had been the anchor of my life for nearly half a century. At the church, the service was a blur. The pastor's words droned on, a meaningless string of platitudes. I saw my sons and their wives in the front pew, looking somber and bereaved. They were playing their parts perfectly. David cried silently, Tiffany rubbing his back in a gesture of wifely support. Mark looked stoic and strong, the man of the family now. It was all a lie. A grotesque performance. After the service, as people began to file out to their cars for the procession to the cemetery, I knew this was my last chance. I walked towards the open casket at the front of the empty church. My legs felt like they were moving through deep water. Each step was a monumental effort. He looked so peaceful, the lines of pain and illness finally gone from his face. They had dressed him in his favorite navy blue suit, the one he wore to our son's weddings. My heart ached with a love so profound it felt like it would tear me apart. I reached out my hand, my fingers trembling, wanting to smooth his silver hair one last time, to touch his cheek. But before my fingers could make contact, a figure stepped directly in front of me, blocking my view. It was Mark, my own son. "Mom, calm down," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. His hand clamped down on my arm, not in comfort but in restraint. It was a grip of control. "Don't make a scene. People are still here. They're watching from the doorway." A scene? The word struck me like a physical blow. I, a wife of 45 years, trying to say a private goodbye to the love of my life, was making a scene? I looked past his rigid shoulder and saw David standing a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the stained glass window, his wife Tiffany whispering intently in his ear. Neither of them moved to help me. Neither of them said a single word. It was as if I were a stranger, an embarrassing, overly emotional guest who needed to be managed and removed before she could disrupt the carefully orchestrated proceedings. My gaze fell upon Arthur's wrist, resting on the white satin lining of the casket, and a fresh wave of pain, sharp and specific, pierced through the fog of my grief. It was bare. His watch was gone. The night before, after the funeral home had brought Arthur back to our house for a final family viewing, I had gone to his bedside table to get his watch. It was a beautiful, old gold timepiece that his own father had given him on his wedding day. It was his most treasured possession. I wanted him to wear it on his final journey. Felt right. But the watch wasn't in its usual velvet box. I had searched the entire drawer, my panic rising. I called Mark, who had been the last one in the room with his father. He'd told me, his voice slick with false sympathy. "Mom, you're exhausted. You probably just misplaced it. It'll turn up. Don't worry about it now." Now, seeing Mark stand guard over his father's body, a cold, sickening realization began to dawn. It hadn't been misplaced. It had been taken. "Where's your father's watch, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse with unshed tears and sudden chilling clarity. He flinched, a flicker of something, guilt? Annoyance? In his eyes. He wouldn't look at me. "I don't know, Mom. It's not important right now. Let's go. The cars are waiting." He tried to steer me away from the casket, his grip tightening on my arm. But I stood my ground, my feet rooted to the spot. Tiffany glided over, her face a mask of counterfeit sympathy. "Evelyn, dear," she said, her voice like poisoned honey, "perhaps you should go and wait in the car. You look exhausted. Let us handle this." Handle this. They were handling it. They were managing their father's death like a business transaction, and I was an emotional liability they needed to contain. They hustled me away from the casket, away from my husband, and walked me down the aisle like a prisoner. I never got my moment. They stole it from me. The last image I had of my husband was not of his peaceful face, but of my son's broad, unyielding back. As I sat alone in my empty house that night, the silence was a physical presence, a crushing weight. The grief was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother me. But underneath it, a different feeling was taking root, something cold and hard and sharp. Resolve. They had not only disrespected me, their mother, but they had desecrated the memory of their father in his final moments. They had underestimated me, and they had no idea what Arthur, in his infinite love and wisdom, had left behind to protect me. A week later, I was back in Mr. Davies' office, the scent of lemon polish and old paper doing nothing to calm the frantic, bird-like fluttering in my chest. The room felt like a stage, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the afternoon sun, the final act of my family's tragedy about to play out. My children and their wives were already there, seated around the large, gleaming mahogany desk. They were dressed in expensive, somber-toned clothing, their performance of mourning still in full effect. They spoke in low, hushed tones, but their eyes were bright with anticipation. There was a nervous energy in the room, the kind you feel before a race is about to start. They looked like predators who had been patiently tracking their prey, and were now closing in for the kill. And then I saw it. The thing that confirmed every ugly suspicion, that turned my grief into ice-cold, righteous fury. On Mark's wrist, glinting under the soft, discreet lights of the office lamp, was my husband's gold watch. He wore it so casually, so arrogantly, as if it were his birthright, as if he hadn't stolen it from his dying father's bedside table. He caught me looking, and for a split second his composure faltered. He instinctively tried to pull the cuff of his expensive shirt down over it, a small guilty gesture that told me everything I needed to know. It was a confession, silent and absolute. My blood ran cold, but my spine turned to steel. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was about a level of disrespect so profound, a callousness so deep, it was almost unimaginable. This was about honor. That was when Mark delivered his line, the one he had clearly rehearsed, about the meeting being only for the heirs. His words meant to dismiss me, to put me in my place as a relic of the past barely registered. All I could see was that watch. A symbol of my husband's legacy, of his father's love, now a trophy on the wrist of his greedy, dishonorable son. I slid the heavy, cream-colored envelope onto the table. My hand was perfectly steady. The fury had burned away the trembling. Mr. Davies, a kind, silver-haired man who had been Arthur's friend and lawyer for over 30 years, looked from the envelope to me, a deep, unspoken question in his wise eyes. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He understood everything. He had helped Arthur set this final, painful stage. He picked up the document that Mark had so confidently provided, the decoy will. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense room. "We are gathered here today to read the last will and testament of Arthur Reed," he began, his voice formal and somber. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. Karen leaned forward in her chair, a hungry, predatory look on her face. Tiffany was practically vibrating with anticipation, a tight, triumphant smile already forming on her lips. "I, Arthur Reed," Mr. Davies read, his voice even and professional, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." He paused, adjusting his glasses, letting the moment hang in the air. "I bequeath my entire estate, including the property at 42 Maple Lane, all financial investments, bank accounts and personal effects, to be divided equally between my two beloved sons, Mark Reed and David Reed." The effect was instantaneous. A collective, relieved sigh went through my children and their wives. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief and victory. Karen squeezed Mark's hand with such force her knuckles turned white. Tiffany shot me a look of pure, triumphant pity. A look that said, "See? You're nothing now. We've won." David finally looked up from the floor, a weak, relieved smile spreading across his face. They were already spending the money in their heads, I could see it in their eyes. Calculating the price of new cars, lavish vacations, kitchen renovations, maybe even a bigger house. Their father wasn't even cold in the ground, and they were already liquidating his life, erasing his memory and replacing it with dollar signs. They were smiling, so sure of their victory, so sure they had finally gotten what they deserved. That's when I cleared my throat softly. The sound was small, but it cut through their smug celebration like a shard of glass. "Excuse me, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I believe there has been a mistake. That is not my husband's final will." Every eye in the room snapped towards me. The triumphant smiles froze, cracking like cheap porcelain. Mark's face darkened with a mixture of confusion and pure, unadulterated anger. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Dad showed us that will himself months ago." "Your father showed you what he wanted you to see," I replied calmly, looking directly into his eyes. My gaze then dropped deliberately to the watch on his wrist. "Just as he showed you where he kept his most treasured possessions." The air in the room crackled with a new dangerous energy. My accusation about the watch hung between us, unspoken but perfectly understood. Mark's face went from a blotchy red to a sickly pale. He knew what I meant. He knew that I knew. His bravado began to crumble, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. I gently pushed the heavy, cream-colored envelope towards the center of the desk. "This," I announced to the room, my voice resonating with a strength I didn't know I possessed, a strength borrowed from Arthur's love and foresight, "is the real legally binding will. Certified and notarized just 3 months before my husband's passing. It supersedes any document you may have seen." Mr. Davies, ever the professional, showed no surprise. He had been expecting this moment. He picked up the envelope, his movements deliberate and calm amidst the rising tide of chaos. He slid it open with a silver letter opener, the chick of the blade against the paper unnaturally loud in the dead silence. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, bound with a blue ribbon, starkly different from the single flimsy page he had just read. His eyes, sharp behind his spectacles, scanned the first paragraph quickly. He looked up, his gaze moving from my sons' panicked faces, to their wives' gaping mouths, and finally to me. He gave me a slow, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the painful but necessary act we were about to perform. "Mrs. Reed is correct," he said, his voice now carrying a new weight of absolute authority. "This document is indeed a subsequent last will and testament. It is properly executed, witnessed, and dated after the previous document, and as such it legally revokes and nullifies any and all prior wills." The color drained completely from my children's faces. Karen's mouth fell open in a silent, horrified, "Oh. What? That's not possible," she finally stammered, her voice a shrill squeak. "He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind." Mr. Davies ignored her, his focus entirely on the document in his hands. He held it up and began to read, his voice a clear, dispassionate bell tolling the death of their expectations. "I, Arthur Reed, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all former wills and testaments." He paused for a deliberate, dramatic effect, letting the words sink in, letting them feel the ground crumbling beneath their feet. "And I give, devise, and bequeath my entire estate, both real and personal, of every kind and description, wheresoever situated, as follows." He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting mine for a fraction of a second. "To my beloved wife, Evelyn Reed, I leave everything. The house, the contents therein, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, life insurance policies, and all personal effects. She is to be the sole and absolute heir to my entire estate." For a moment, there was nothing but a profound, echoing silence. It was as if the world had stopped spinning, holding its breath. Then the dam of their composure broke, and the room erupted in a torrent of ugly, desperate rage. "Impossible!" Mark roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk so hard the heavy glass water pitcher jumped. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the polished floor. "Dad would never do that. You manipulated him. You took advantage of a sick, dying man." He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me, his face contorted with a fury that was terrifying to behold. "Undue influence," Karen shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, all her polished sophistication gone, replaced by raw, naked greed. "We'll fight this. We'll take this to court. We'll prove he was incompetent. You won't get away with this, you old witch." David was just staring, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, looking back and forth between me and Mark, as if he couldn't process the reality of what was happening. Tiffany, however, recovered quickly, her mind already racing for an angle. "This is a fraud," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "A woman your age can't handle that kind of money. You'll squander it. It belongs to his sons, to his family, to his legacy. A woman your age." The words were meant to diminish me, to paint me as incompetent and senile, a foolish old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. But instead of hurting me, they filled me with a righteous, incandescent fire. I stood up slowly, my movements calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to their frantic hysteria. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. "You want to talk about manipulating a sick man?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, forcing them to lean in to hear. "Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the day you, Mark, and you, Karen, came into my kitchen with power of attorney papers, trying to trick me into signing away control of everything my husband and I built while he was dying in the next room. Is that the kind of help you were offering. Mark recoiled as if I'd physically struck him. Karen's face went white. She had thought that conversation was a secret, a private little conspiracy. And you want to talk about family legacy? I continued, turning my cold gaze on Tiffany. Is it part of the family legacy to prevent a wife from saying a final goodbye at her husband's funeral? Is it part of the legacy to steal his watch from his bedside before his body is even cold? My gaze locked with Mark's. I glanced pointedly at his wrist. He instinctively covered the watch with his other hand, a useless, damning gesture. The game was up, and he knew it. The raw panic in his eyes was my first taste of victory. But the chaos was just beginning. Because my husband, my brilliant, loving husband, had left one more thing inside that envelope. It wasn't about money. It was about the truth. You'll want to stick around to hear what my husband's final words to his sons were. It's even better than you think. Mr. Davies let the shouting and accusations die down. He was a pillar of calm in the storm of their fury, a silent conductor waiting for the cacophony to end. When the room finally fell into a tense, simmering silence, punctuated only by Karen's ragged, angry breaths, he reached back into the cream-colored envelope. He pulled out another, smaller envelope, sealed with a distinctive wax seal bearing Arthur's initial. In addition to the will, he said, his voice cutting through the thick, poisonous tension, Arthur also left a personal letter. He stipulated in a separate instruction to me that it was to be opened and read here, in this room, in the event that his final wishes were questioned. He slid the letter across the polished desk to me. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths and a husband's final, heartbreaking verdict. My name was on the front, written in Arthur's familiar, slightly shaky hand from his last months. My hands trembled as I took it. It felt like holding his hand one last time. A final piece of him left for me to hold. What is that? David finally spoke, his voice hoarse and broken. He looked terrified. If it's about the family, about the inheritance, we have a right to hear what's in it. Oh, you'll hear it, I said, my voice soft but unyielding as I broke the wax seal. Your father wanted you to. He insisted on it. I unfolded the single page of heavy stationery and took a deep, steadying breath, letting the sight of his handwriting wash over me. A final gift of love and validation. Then I began to read his words aloud, my voice clear and unwavering, a vessel for my husband's final message to the sons who had broken his heart. My dearest Evelyn, I began, my voice strong. If you are reading this letter aloud, it means I was right. It means my greatest fear has come to pass, that our sons have shown their true colors, and that they would value my money more than they value their own mother. I pray I am wrong, but my heart tells me I am not. I paused and looked up, meeting each of their gazes. Mark was staring at me, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Karen was shaking her head slowly, whispering no, no, no under her breath as if she could deny the reality of what was happening. David looked like a little boy again, lost and utterly broken. I continued reading, my voice gaining strength with every word of truth Arthur had penned. For the past year, my world has grown smaller. Confined to this house, to this bed, I have become an observer. I have sat in this house and I have watched. I have listened. I pretended to be asleep when I was not. I was quiet when every fiber of my being wanted to scream. And I saw things that have broken my heart into 1,000 pieces. I saw you, Mark, and your wife Karen, bring legal papers into our home. I was in the bedroom, the door ajar, and I heard your entire, shameful pitch. I heard you talk about how to manage your mother, how to take control of the finances her hard work and sacrifice helped to build. You spoke of her not with love, but as a burden, a problem to be solved. You were not trying to help her. You were trying to help yourselves to her future, to your inheritance, before I was even gone. Karen let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She and Mark exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Their secret was out. I turned the page, my voice ringing with the clarity of Arthur's conviction. I saw you, David, and your wife, Tiffany, visit with your bright, false smiles and your empty words. I saw how you would agree with your brother in hushed tones in the hallway. I saw how you would stand by silently while he disrespected your mother, while your wife treated her with condescending pity. Your silence, David, was a betrayal as loud as any shout. In every moment you failed to defend her. You chose ambition over love. You chose convenience over loyalty. You have forgotten everything. You have forgotten the sacrifices your mother made for you. You have forgotten the nights she worked double shifts at the diner, coming home exhausted with the smell of grease on her clothes, so you could have a proper college fund. You have forgotten how she packed away her own dreams of being an artist, her canvases gathering dust in the attic, so that your childhoods could be filled with everything you ever wanted. She gave you her entire life, her youth, her dreams. And in my final days you repaid her with contempt and impatience, circling like buzzards waiting for me to die. I had to stop for a moment to compose myself. The memory of those sacrifices, of her tired smiles and unwavering support, raw and painful. The room was utterly still. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to have stopped, holding its breath. I took a final, shaky breath and read the last, devastating paragraph. This will is not a weapon. It is a shield. I am leaving everything to Evelyn, not to punish you, but to protect her from you. To give her the freedom she sacrificed for all of us. The freedom to live, to paint, to be happy, without having to justify her existence to children who see her only as a walking, talking bank account. She earned every penny of this 1,000 times over. It is her life to live. Do not dishonor my memory by trying to take it from her. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. He signed it, I said, my voice barely a whisper but echoing in the profound silence. Your loving husband and deeply disappointed father, Arthur. Their faces were pale, their arguments silenced by their own father's words from the grave. They thought it was over. They thought the humiliation couldn't get any worse. They were wrong. Mr. Davies had one final piece of paper to read. Mr. Davies let the weight of Arthur's letter settle in the room. The silence was no longer tense. It was heavy, thick with shame and the undeniable truth. My sons and their wives couldn't meet my eyes. They stared at the polished mahogany of the table, at their own hands, anywhere but at the wreckage of their own making. The letter had been a judgment from a man they could no longer argue with, and it had stripped them of every last shred of justification. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Davies cleared his throat, the sound a deliberate signal that the proceedings were not yet over. Their heads snapped up, a mixture of dread and a desperate, foolish hope in their eyes. Perhaps there was something else, a final reprieve, a way out of this nightmare. There is one final codicil to the will, he said, picking up the last sheet of paper. It looked small and insignificant compared to the main document, but I knew it held the final, masterfully crafted twist. A provision Arthur added just a week before he passed. He was, as you know, a very thorough man. Arthur was aware, Mr. Davies continued, his voice carefully neutral, though I could detect a slight, almost imperceptible edge of disapproval, that this decision might cause significant financial distress for his sons, given their current lifestyles and financial obligations. He glanced up over his spectacles, a silent acknowledgement of the years Arthur had complained to him about bailing the boys out of their self-inflicted financial messes. He did not wish to see them destitute, regardless of their actions. A flicker of something, hope? Disbelief, appeared in their eyes. They leaned forward, hanging on his every word. After all that, after the letter, could it be that their father had offered them an olive branch from the grave? Mr. Davies adjusted his glasses. I hereby direct my estate, under the sole executorship of my wife, Evelyn Reed, to pay a monthly allowance to each of my sons, Mark Reed and David Reed, in the amount of $500. $500? Tiffany blurted out, her voice a contemptuous squawk before she could stop herself. The word hung in the air, a perfect encapsulation of her disgust and disbelief. Mr. Davies held up a hand, silencing her. This allowance, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, is to be paid on the 1st of every month for a period of exactly 24 months, and not a day longer. It is intended as a temporary cushion, to allow them to adjust their financial planning. $500 a month. After years of expecting a multi-million-dollar inheritance, of planning their lives around a windfall they saw as their birthright, this was what was left for them. It wasn't a cushion. It was an exquisitely painful insult. It was just enough money to be a constant, monthly reminder of what they had lost. I could almost hear Arthur's dry chuckle from here. It was a final, Perfectly executed checkmate. Karen burst into a laugh, but it was a hysterical, unhinged sound, teetering on the edge of a scream. $500? Is that a joke? That wouldn't even cover my car payment. That's what we're worth. But Mr. Davies wasn't finished. The hammer was yet to fall. However, he said, his voice turning stern and cold, this provision comes with a strict, non-negotiable, and legally binding condition. He looked directly at Mark, then at David, pinning them with his gaze. This allowance is contingent upon your complete and total acceptance of this will. Any attempt, direct or indirect, to contest the will, to challenge your mother's capacity as executor, to question your father's mental state at the time of signing, or to initiate any form of legal action against the estate or against Evelyn Reed personally, will result in the immediate and permanent termination of this allowance for both parties. He let the words hang in the air, a legal guillotine poised over their heads. It was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. Arthur had not only protected me, but he had also turned my sons against each other. He had tied their meager financial futures together. If one of them got greedy and sued, the other would lose his insulting pittance too. He had chained them together with their own desperation, forcing them to police each other's greed. The fight drained out of them completely, replaced by a pathetic, dawning horror. The anger was gone, the indignation vanished. All that was left was the raw, ugly face of panic. That's when the pleading began, a complete and humiliating reversal. "Mom," David said, his voice cracking. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading like a child's. "Mom, please. We're family. We can work this out. We made a mistake. We were grieving, we weren't thinking straight. You can't just cut us off." "Grieving?" I asked, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Is that what you call it?" Because it looked a lot like calculation to me. It looked like greed. It looked like you couldn't wait for your father to die. Karen, her face streaked with mascara-laden tears that I knew were utterly fake, came towards me, her hands outstretched. "Evelyn, please. We're so sorry. We love you. Don't do this to your family. Don't let money tear us apart." The hypocrisy was so profound, so breathtaking, it gave me a strange sense of clarity. Money isn't tearing us apart, Karen. Your character is. You foredid this. You tore this family apart the moment you decided your inheritance was more important than your mother's dignity. I stood up, gathering my purse and the precious, validating letter from my husband. "Mr. Davies has my new contact information for any estate matters. The rest of this is between you and him." I turned and walked to the door, my back straight, my head held high. "Mom, wait." Mark called out, his voice a desperate, pleading cry. "Don't walk away from us. You can't do this." I paused at the door, my hand on the cool brass handle, but I didn't turn around. "You walked away from me a long time ago, Mark. You walked away from me at your father's funeral. I'm just finally catching up." I walked out of that office, leaving the ruins of their greed and their shattered expectations behind me. I thought I had won my freedom, but I soon realized the battle had just moved to a new front. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of liberating activity. With Mr. Davies' expert, compassionate help, I began to dismantle my old life and build a new one from the foundations of Arthur's final gift. The first and most symbolic act was selling the large family house in the Chicago suburbs. It was a beautiful home, but it was haunted now, every room echoing with the ghosts of a family that no longer existed, every corner tainted by the memory of my children's betrayal. The sale went through surprisingly quickly, and the final sum deposited into my new, private bank account was even more substantial than I had anticipated. Arthur, my quiet, careful Arthur, had been a much wiser and more successful investor than he had ever let on. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of profound, absolute security. It wasn't just about the money in the bank. It was the emotional security of knowing I was finally, irrevocably, in control of my own destiny. I didn't buy another house right away. The thought of rattling around in another empty home was unappealing. Instead, on a whim, I rented a stunning, modern apartment on the 30th floor of a sleek glass high-rise, right on the edge of Lake Michigan. The view was breathtaking, a vast, ever-changing panorama of water and sky. Every morning, I would sit with a cup of coffee in a comfortable armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows and watch the sunrise paint the water in shades of pink, orange, and gold. It felt like watching my own new life dawning. A vibrant, colorful future stretching out before me. True to Arthur's dearest wish, the first thing I did was enroll in a painting class at a local community arts center. The moment I walked into the studio, the familiar, sharp smell of turpentine and oil paints felt like coming home after a long and arduous journey. My hands, stiff and clumsy at first after decades of disuse, slowly remembered the familiar motions of mixing colors on a palette, the feel of a loaded brush against a blank canvas. I started painting landscapes of the lake, trying to capture its moods, the serene blue of a calm morning, the turbulent gray of an approaching storm. I poured all my grief, my anger, and my newfound hope onto those canvases. It was a kind of therapy, a way of cleansing the bitterness from my soul. And slowly, tentatively, I started making friends. In the building's well-equipped gym, where I had started a gentle fitness routine, I met Linda. She was a witty, vibrant widow in her early 70s with a wicked sense of humor, a closet full of colorful scarves, and a shared love for old black and white movies. She took me under her wing, dragging me to yoga classes I was terrible at, to a book club that drank more wine than they discussed literature, and to fancy brunches where we would laugh until our sides hurt. For the first time in decades, I was having fun. I was laughing from my belly. I was just being Evelyn, not a wife, not a mother, not a caregiver. Just me. But the shadows of my old life still lingered at the edges of my new, bright world. The phone call started about a week after the inheritance was officially settled, and the house went on the market. The first one was from Mark. He didn't bother with pleasantries. His tone was aggressive, demanding, filled with a sense of entitlement that was truly staggering. "You can't just sell the family home," he shouted into the phone, his voice tight with rage. "We grew up there. We have memories there. You're erasing our history." "Your father left me the house, Mark," I said calmly, looking out at the serene blue of the lake, refusing to let his anger infect my peace. "It became my property. And the only history you seemed concerned with until now was its market value, and how quickly you could liquidate it." I hung up the phone before he could respond, my hand surprisingly steady. Then came David's call a few days later. He tried a different, more insidious tactic. Pathetic, cloying pleading. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with a manufactured remorse that I could see right through. "I can't sleep at night. Tiffany is a wreck. The kids are asking for you. We miss you. We know we made a terrible mistake. Please, Mom, just talk to us. We can fix this." "You had years to talk to me, David," I told him, my voice as cold and clear as the winter ice on the lake. "You were too busy. I'm busy now too. I'm busy living the life your father wanted for me. A life of peace." I blocked his number before he could reply. Karen and Tiffany tried as well, leaving long, rambling, tear-filled voicemails on my new phone. They were a masterclass in manipulation, filled with dramatic apologies, not-so-subtle hints about their mounting credit card bills, the rising cost of their children's private schools, and the deep social embarrassment they were facing. I deleted them all without listening to the end. One rainy Tuesday night, however, as the wind howled off the lake and rattled my windows, the loneliness crept in. I was sitting in my new, beautiful apartment, surrounded by a silence that suddenly felt vast and empty. A half-finished painting sat on the easel, a turbulent gray sky over a choppy, angry lake. For a moment, a powerful wave of doubt and sadness washed over me. Had I been too harsh? Had I destroyed my own family over pride and money? They were still my sons, the babies I had rocked to sleep, the little boys whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose triumphs I had celebrated and whose heartbreaks I had soothed. A deep, aching sadness for what was lost, for the family that had once been, settled in my heart. Then I closed my eyes and I remembered. I let the memories play out, not the soft-focused, sentimental ones but the sharp, ugly, recent ones. I saw Mark's hand, his strong, familiar hand, physically blocking me from my husband's casket. I saw the glint of Arthur's stolen gold watch on his wrist in the lawyer's office. I saw Karen's mocking, triumphant smile. I saw Tiffany's eyes, filled not with sympathy, but with condescending pity. I heard their voices in my kitchen, plotting to take control, calling me a burden. The sadness receded, burned away by the cold, hard clarity of the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about respect. It was about a lifetime of being taken for granted, of being seen as a utility rather than a person. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. I would not let their belated, self-serving guilt-tripping drag me back into the darkness. I had earned this light. I was finally breathing again. I was becoming the woman I was always meant to be. But my children weren't going to let me go that easily. Their desperation was about to lead to a very public, very humiliating confrontation. A month later, Linda, my new partner in crime, brandished 2 invitations like a trophy. "You need to get out and see the local art scene, Evelyn," she'd insisted, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "There's an opening at a very chic gallery in the River North neighborhood. It's the perfect opportunity to wear that fabulous blue dress you bought. Plus," she added with a conspiratorial wink, "they have free wine and tiny fancy snacks that you can't identify but are delicious. It's a win-win." I was hesitant at first. The idea of a crowded, noisy room still felt a bit overwhelming. But the thought of an evening surrounded by creativity, color, and intelligent conversation was too appealing to resist. It was a world I had once dreamed of being a part of, a world I was finally free to enter. So I agreed. I put on the deep blue silk dress, a pair of comfortable but elegant heels, and the simple pearl earrings Arthur had given me for our 25th anniversary. For the first time in a very long time, as I looked in the mirror, I saw not just a widow or a scorned mother, but a woman with a future. An interesting woman, I hoped. The gallery was buzzing with a sophisticated, vibrant energy. The space was a converted warehouse with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and brilliant track lighting that made the art pop. People drifted from massive, colorful paintings to strange, compelling sculptures, their wine glasses in hand, their voices a low, cultured murmur. The art was modern and abstract, a riot of color, texture, and emotion that I found absolutely exhilarating. It felt like a visual representation of my own inner world, chaotic, but full of life. I was deep in a fascinating conversation with a young, intense painter about his use of texture to convey memory when I heard it. A voice sharp and familiar, cutting through the pleasant gallery buzz like a knife. "I just don't understand her selfishness. After everything we did for her, to throw away her own family like this. It's unnatural. It's all about the money, you know." My blood ran cold. The wine in my glass might as well have turned to ice. I turned slowly, a feeling of dread coiling in my stomach. There, standing by a garish, twisted metal sculpture, were Karen and Tiffany. They looked diminished. Their clothes, while still designer, seemed a season out of date, a little worn at the edges. Their faces were drawn in tight with a bitterness that no amount of expensive makeup could hide. They were speaking to another couple, poisoning the air with their self-pitying lies. They hadn't seen me yet. Linda followed my gaze, her cheerful expression immediately vanishing. "Oh dear," she whispered, her hand instinctively finding my arm. "Are those the vultures?" I nodded, my stomach twisting into a painful knot. "Let's just go the other way," I said, trying to steer her towards the exit. My lovely evening had been ruined. I just wanted to escape before they saw me. But it was too late. Tiffany's sharp eyes scanned the room and locked onto mine. Her face lit up with a predatory, triumphant gleam. This was no coincidence. She grabbed Karen's arm, whispered something urgently, and they started moving towards us, their path deliberate and unwavering, like sharks closing in. "Evelyn. Oh my goodness, what a surprise. I can't believe you're here," Tiffany chirped, her voice loud enough to turn a few heads, a perfect imitation of delighted surprise. She rushed forward and tried to envelop me in a hug, but I took a firm step back, holding my wine glass up like a shield. Her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. "We just wanted to see some art," Karen lied smoothly, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the crowd, gauging the audience for the scene she was about to create. "And we're so glad we ran into you. We've been so worried. You haven't been answering our calls." "I've been busy," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Enjoy the exhibit." I tried to turn away, to end the conversation. Linda, bless her loyal heart, stepped in, a formidable protector in her brightly colored scarf. "Evelyn has a very full and happy life now," she said, her voice polite but with an underlying firmness that was a clear warning. "It was nice to see you." But they were on a mission. This was no chance encounter. Just then, as if on cue, Mark and David appeared from another section of the gallery. They walked towards us, their expressions a practiced blend of concern and deep, soulful sorrow. It was a four-pronged attack. A carefully planned, publicly staged ambush. "Mom," David said, his voice soft and pleading, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Thank God we found you. We need to talk. We need to fix this." The scene they were creating was starting to draw serious attention. Conversations around us faltered. People were lowering their voices, their gazes shifting from the art on the walls to the real-life drama unfolding in the center of the room. This was their plan. They were trying to corner me, to use the public setting and my own fear of embarrassment to force me into a conversation I did not want to have. They thought I would crumble under the pressure, that I would be desperate to quiet them down and agree to whatever they wanted just to make the humiliating scene go away. It was an ambush. They had cornered me, thinking the public setting would force me to be polite, to listen to their lies. They had once again completely and utterly underestimated me. What they did next was unbelievable, but my response, well, let's just say it's the reason their faces ended up all over the local news. Mark stepped forward, taking charge, assuming the role of the reasonable, long-suffering son. He projected his voice, not shouting, but making sure everyone in our immediate vicinity could hear every carefully chosen word. "Mom, we know we made terrible mistakes," he said, his voice resonating with a fake sincerity that made my skin crawl. "We were blinded by grief. We weren't ourselves. We just want our mother back. We want our family back." A few onlookers who didn't know the context murmured sympathetically. An older woman nearby gave me a look of pity, as if I were a stubborn, unforgiving old woman. They were painting me as the cold, cruel matriarch, and themselves as the remorseful, loving children desperate for a reconciliation. It was a masterful, disgusting performance. But I was done being a silent character in their self-serving play. It was time to rewrite the script right here, right now. I took a small step forward, into the center of the circle they had formed around me. I held my wine glass steady, a small island of calm in their manufactured storm, and I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a sharp, brilliant smile, full of the terrible clarity they had forced upon me. "Mistakes?" I asked, my own voice calm but carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet gallery. "That's an interesting word for it. Is that what you call it, Mark, when you physically block your own mother from her husband's casket at his funeral? A mistake?" The sympathetic murmur stopped abruptly. The air went still. Mark's face froze, the practiced sincerity melting away to reveal the raw panic underneath. "And is it just a mistake?" I continued, my gaze sweeping over all four of them, each word a carefully aimed dart. "To try and trick a grieving woman, your own mother, into signing away her legal rights to her own home? Because I seemed to recall some power of attorney papers that looked a lot more like a premeditated plan than a simple mistake." Karen let out an audible gasp, her hand flying to her throat. A man standing nearby, holding an art catalog, lowered it slowly, his eyes wide with shocked fascination. This was better than any performance art. I turned my full attention to David, my quiet, complicit son. "And you, my dear David? Is it just being blinded by grief when you stand by and watch all of this happen? When you let your brother and your wives treat me like an inconvenience, a nuisance to be managed, at the most painful moment of my life? Or is that just the price of keeping the peace in your own house?" But I had saved the final, most damning piece of evidence for last. The one they couldn't deny or explain away. I looked directly at Mark, at his handsome, panicked face, and then I deliberately lowered my gaze to his wrist. "And tell me, Mark," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful and carrying than a shout. "What kind of grief makes a son steal his father's solid gold watch from his bedside table before he's even passed away?" I raised my hand, my finger steady, and pointed directly at the gold watch glinting under the gallery lights on his wrist. That watch. His father's watch. A family heirloom passed down from his grandfather. Stolen like a common thief, and worn as a trophy to the will reading. A collective sharp intake of breath went through the small crowd that had now gathered around us. Everyone's eyes followed my finger to Mark's wrist. He looked down at the watch as if it had turned into a venomous snake, biting the hand that wore it. He instinctively tried to hide it behind his back. A clumsy, useless gesture that only confirmed his guilt. The evidence was there for everyone to see. The story I was telling wasn't just a story anymore. It had physical, gleaming golden proof. The color drained from their faces. They were exposed, their carefully constructed narrative of victimhood utterly shattered by a few simple, undeniable truths. They were trapped in the spotlight of their own making. In a last pathetic act of desperation, a final theatrical flourish for the audience, David fell to his knees on the polished concrete floor. "Mom, please," he cried, actual tears of humiliation and panic now streaming down his face. "Please forgive us. We'll do anything. We'll give it all back." The sight was so grotesque, so utterly pathetic, it didn't stir an ounce of pity in me. Only a profound, weary sadness. I looked down at him, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. "Get up, David," I said, my voice sharp and final. "Dignity isn't something you can beg for on the floor of an art gallery. It's something you earn through your actions. Forgiveness is built on a foundation of respect. A foundation you bulldozed into rubble a long time ago." Just then, a well-dressed woman with a press pass hanging from her neck, a well-known local art critic and society columnist I recognized from the city's lifestyle magazine, raised her phone. The flash was subtle but unmistakable. She was recording. She had captured the entire sordid performance. As I turned and walked away with my new fiercely loyal friend Linda by my side, I could hear the whispers, the shocked murmurs, and the distinct unmistakable clicking of phone cameras behind me. Their world was about to come crashing down in a very public, very permanent way. And I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces. I didn't realize the art critic had live-streamed the entire confrontation on her popular Instagram account. By the time Linda and I had settled into a quiet, elegant bar a few blocks away, my phone, which I'd put on silent, was buzzing incessantly in my purse. Linda pulled out her own phone. Her eyes widened. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and shock. "You're trending." She turned her screen towards me. The video was everywhere. It had been screen recorded, shared on Facebook, tweeted, and was rapidly climbing the charts on the local news websites. The headline was brutal and catchy. "Greed and Grief. Finance VP brother publicly confronted by disinherited mother at gallery opening." The video was devastatingly clear. The high-quality audio captured everything. Their carefully staged ambush, my calm, factual takedown, and the damning, undeniable visual of the stolen watch on Mark's wrist. David's pathetic, groveling display on the polished gallery floor was the humiliating grand finale. There was no ambiguity. The court of public opinion delivered its verdict swiftly and mercilessly. The comments section was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated outrage directed at my sons and their wives. Strangers were calling them ghouls, vultures, a disgrace. The consequences weren't immediate and explosive like a bomb going off. They were a slow, creeping fire. The kind that smolders in the walls for days before finally consuming the entire house. It was a slow burn of social and professional ruin. For Mark, the fallout was catastrophic. He worked as a vice president at a boutique investment firm, a job that relied entirely on an image of unimpeachable trustworthiness, stability, and old-fashioned family values. His clients were wealthy, older individuals, exactly the demographic most horrified and disgusted by the video. A week after the gallery incident, his company's biggest and oldest client, a formidable dowager with a massive portfolio and a fearsome reputation, publicly pulled her account. She gave an interview to a local business journal stating that she refused to entrust her family's legacy and salary dividends to a man who treats his own mother with such callous contempt and dishonor. The story, complete with a link to the viral video, was a devastating blow to the firm's reputation. 2 weeks later, after a series of emergency board meetings, Mark was quietly but firmly forced to resign. The senior partnership, the promotion he had been chasing for years, the one he had likely been counting on his inheritance to secure, vanished into thin air, replaced by the deep biting shame of unemployment and public disgrace. David's small local marketing business, which relied heavily on a friendly, community-focused, family man reputation, was hit even harder and faster. His clients were small business owners, florists, restaurant owners, local real estate agents. They started canceling their contracts in droves. His company's online review pages were flooded with one-star ratings and scathing comments referencing the video. The family man image he had so carefully cultivated was shattered, revealed as a hollow marketing ploy. Within 3 months, he was forced to declare bankruptcy and close up shop for good. For Karen and Tiffany, the consequences were social, a death by 1,000 cuts. They were abruptly and politely asked to resign from the prestigious charity committees they sat on. Their weekly tennis games at the country club were mysteriously cancelled. Their partners suddenly unavailable. The friends they used to lunch with, the ones they gossiped with and competed with, suddenly stopped answering their calls and texts. They became social pariahs, whispered about at the grocery store, pointed at in the school pickup line. Their public humiliation became a delicious, cautionary piece of local gossip, a story told over coffee and cocktails throughout the affluent suburbs. In their rage, their humiliation, and their rapidly escalating financial desperation, they did the one thing Arthur had explicitly, brilliantly warned them not to do. They hired a slick, expensive lawyer, a man known for his aggressive tactics, and filed a formal lawsuit to contest the will. The suit was a work of fiction, claiming I had exerted undue influence over a man in a weakened and confused mental state, and demanded the entire inheritance be turned over to them. The moment they filed the official contest with the court, a notification was sent to Mr. Davies' office. He called me the same day. "Evelyn," he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice, the sound of a good man seeing justice served. "I'm calling to inform you that, as per the codicil of Arthur's will, and in response to the lawsuit filed this morning by your sons, I have officially terminated the monthly allowance for Mark and David Reed, effective immediately." They played their last card, and they lost spectacularly. They had lost the house. They had lost the inheritance. They had lost their jobs, their businesses, and their social standing. And now, in a final spectacular act of self-destruction fueled by their own boundless greed, they had lost even the insulting pittance their father had left them out of a final misplaced sense of pity. They had lost everything. Not because of me, but because they couldn't see past their own reflection in a pile of gold. 6 months passed. The cold, brutal Chicago winter gave way to a bright, hopeful spring. The city thawed, and so did my heart. The scandal, like all things, eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by new dramas, new outrages. But the consequences for my sons and their wives were permanent. Their old lives had been burned to the ground, and I heard through the grapevine that the rebuilding process was painful and humiliating. Mark had apparently taken a lower-paying regional sales job in another state, a significant step down in both salary and prestige. David was working for his father-in-law in a menial position, an arrangement I'm sure came with a daily dose of shame and resentment. I felt no joy in their downfall, no triumphant glee. What I felt was a serene, distant sadness for the family we could have been, for the love that had been squandered on the altar of greed. My own life, however, had burst into full, vibrant, unimaginable color. My apartment overlooking the vast, beautiful lake was my sanctuary, my fortress of peace. I had filled it with plants that thrived in the morning sun, with stacks of books I finally had time to read, and with my own canvases, which were growing larger and bolder with each passing week. The first painting I ever sold, a dramatic, turbulent landscape of a storm gathering over Lake Michigan, went for a surprising sum at a local charity auction benefiting an arts program for underprivileged children. The feeling of seeing a small red sold sticker next to my name, of knowing that something I created with my own hands had value and could bring joy to someone else, was a quiet, profound thrill I hadn't allowed myself to even dream of in nearly 50 years. That sale sparked an idea, a purpose that felt bigger than myself. It felt wrong to simply sit on the fortune Arthur had left me, to let it be nothing more than a source of comfort. He had intended it as a shield for me, but I knew he would want it to be something more. A tool. A force for good. With a significant portion of the inheritance, I worked with Mr. Davies to establish the Arthur Reed Foundation. Its mission was simple but vital: to provide pro bono legal services, financial counseling, and emergency housing for elderly individuals in the Chicago area who were facing family abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. It was my way of honoring my husband's fierce protective spirit, of transforming our private pain into a public purpose. Mr. Davies sat on the board, and together we began helping other parents, other spouses, who had been made to feel invisible and powerless by the very people who were supposed to love them the most. We fought for their rights, for their homes, for their inheritance, for their dignity. I sit here now on my balcony, a warm mug of chamomile tea in my hands. The sun is setting over the water, casting a shimmering golden path that seems to stretch all the way to the horizon. A fluffy orange cat I named Artie is purring contentedly on my lap. He showed up on my doorstep one rainy day. A skinny, wet stray, and I, who had never been a pet person, couldn't turn him away. It seems my heart, which I thought had been hardened forever, had softened. My journey has been a painful one. I lost the sons I thought I knew, but in doing so, I found the woman I was always meant to be. I learned that protecting your peace, your dignity, and your well-being is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of survival. I learned that true kindness towards others must begin with a fierce, unwavering kindness towards yourself, and that a lifetime of sacrifice means nothing if it's given to those who see it only as their due. Family, I've discovered, isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's the fiercely loyal friend who holds your hand and faces down the vultures with you in an art gallery. Sometimes it's the kind, honorable lawyer who fights for your honor as if it were his own. And sometimes it's a little stray cat who curls up on your lap and reminds you that a quiet, loving, and undemanding presence can heal the deepest of wounds. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe in the power of speaking our truth. So many of us, especially women of our generation, were taught to be quiet, to keep the peace at all costs. But that peace often comes at the cost of our own happiness, our own voice, our own soul. I want to ask you, has there ever been a time in your life when you had to make a difficult, painful choice to stand up for yourself against the people you loved? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Reading your stories reminds us all that we are not alone in these struggles. Your strength gives others strength. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like, and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice and reclaiming your life. Remember, you are all stronger than you know.